Well. It's been a great time. Hope you're doing well. Happy to have you back on the show. We are excited. We have the most electrifying man on TikTok and political Canadian content these days, Mario Zelaya, with us, laying the smack it down, doing what he does best, calling out the BS in our politics. Super happy to have you on here, Mario. How you holding up?
Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Josh. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for taking the time out. There's a lot going on. Obviously, we saw what happened kind of earlier essentially over the weekend into Monday with what's been going on with the tariffs. And it was been interesting watching your content kind of lay out on TikTok saying like, yeah, Trump's just trolling people and doing what he does best. And then it started moving into a direction of, yeah, I'm not really psyched about this whole ruining our economy situation. And I'm kind of removing the whole Maple MAGA name or label off of my account for now. Is that what kind of got you to that decision, and kind of what was your transition, and almost in some ways the story from day one when Trump said, you know, we're going to be calling Canada our 51st state, into, 2 months later, here we are now.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is I agree with about 95% of his policies, right? And I'm a huge Trump fan and a huge Trump supporter. And to me, the MAGA movement is more about fighting the injustice, because he went through the ringer himself. Like, I mean, they tried weaponizing the FBI, the judicial system. They tried literally everything humanly possible to make sure he never became president. And it's disgusting. And it's not just, me that felt it. Clearly, a lot of Americans did too, because he won by a massive majority. And there's so many states and counties that have swung over to be Republicans. Like, it's hard not to admire that, because to me, he's also in a way fighting this cultural war that we have of wokeism, and going back to the days of, we don't have, 100 different genders. We don't have people identifying as cats and dogs. Like, we need to go back to normalcy. And like, how can you not respect that? And so for me, my whole thing, and the way I, started really posting on my account, was to really push that in Canada, because no one was really talking about stuff like that in Canada. And a lot of the feedback I would get from people that either knew me or friends of friends, or even people would message me like, oh, this is very controversial stuff that you're saying. But why? Why is it controversial for me to say this? Because I'm not falling in line to what the left is saying and to what the media is saying. And there's nothing controversial about it. This is the way things were. Like, we are traditionally, even if you look at the 1982, I think it's the Constitution, or the Charter, I'm sorry, it says, we're founded on the acknowledging the supremacy of God. Like, that's literally in our charter. And so a lot of the things that I talk about are just, they're plain, simple, common sense, what I will say, either facts or common sense beliefs. And so for me, I always said I'm going to identify as a Maple MAGA, because I was that version of it for Canada. And so for me, it's like, to me, MAGA was and is this movement of getting back and pushing back against this kind of cultural war that exists, that people don't realize we're going through. And for me to voice the opinions that people are unable to voice themselves because they work for the federal government. I get so many messages from people who work at the CRA, that are in our army, that they work in high ranking positions within the government, or are employed by the government, whether provincial or federally. They can't say these things. I can. Like, how am I going to get canceled? What am I going to do? Retire? Like, I don't care. And that's the thing, is like, I'm in a position where I'm able to speak freely, as freedom of speech should allow you to do, without having to worry about, oh shoot, I might not be able to pay my mortgage. Oh man, like, I might get fired for saying that. And so to me, that was the whole Maple MAGA movement. And so I love the MAGA movement, but I love Canada more. And so as soon as you start getting into a territory of, we're going to destroy the economy, I'm going to choose Canada over Trump every single time, like, hands down. And it's not like, I created this kind of radical position, like, oh, how dare you flip flop back and forth. No, I didn't flip flop. My position has always been Canada first. Like, I'm not going to choose Donald Trump over my country in any given way, shape, or form. That to me is traitorous. And that's not something, and this is coming from someone who came to the country as a refugee, I'm a minority. My English is my second language. I wasn't born here, but I could never do that to my country. Canada, I am Canadian. To me, I may as well have been born here. And the way my rights and the way I perceive this country and the way I respect the laws and I respect the values of Canada, I am full-blown Canadian. I don't even though I'm born in El Salvador, I would say I don't even identify as someone who's actually from El Salvador, if you can kind of call it that. But in essence, that's why I flipped it. And I said, I'm removing this whole Maple MAGA out of here because I'm not going to show any respect while this whole thing to Trump or give any sort of support to Trump whatsoever while this tariff threat is still in our faces. And truthfully, for for that MAGA, for Trump's, the goalpost has constantly been shifting and changing. First, it's like secure the borders. Okay, well, let's take a look at the data. You have 1.5 million people that you apprehended in Mexico, coming in from Mexico into the US, but you only had 20,000. So why would you implement the same 25% tariff on Canada as you would on Mexico? Then all of a sudden, then it's not about, securing the borders. It's, well, too much fentanyl. There's way too much fentanyl and it's all coming from Canada and it's cartel stuff. Okay. You got about what, 40, 50,000 pounds of fentanyl south of the border. In Canada, you have less than 50 pounds. That's zero, I think it's 0.2% of the fentanyl. Like, it's not even, and not to say that, like, I'm not diminishing the damage that that amount of fentanyl can do. What I'm saying is that the tariff is completely disproportionate. It is an unjustified, unjust tariff that got implemented on Canada based on those two goalposts that have constantly moved. So then he comes up with a third thing. Well, we have this trade deficit. So what is it? Is it going to be the securing of the border because of the illegal immigrants? Is it the fentanyl? And all of a sudden it's the trade deficit. Like, and the reality is, um, I truly believe that he wants to go back to the 1900s where there was no income tax. That's the promise he made to Americans. And I think he wants to go back to that point where there is no income tax and we're going to get all of our revenue from tariffs. But if you look at the trade that happens, and the deficit that they have, and I'm using air quotes because they truly have a surplus when you remove oil and gas, and they get it at a discount from us, and they get 60% of it from us. And that's why he only tariffed that portion of it 10% instead of the 25%, because he didn't want Americans to be pissed at him for increasing the cost of everything, including gas. So 10% immaterial amount, no one will notice it. 25%, that's a quarter, people are going to notice it. And so he does these things very strategically. But at the end of the day, like, as much as I may agree with his policies, decimating your ally when Los Angeles is on fire. We're sending airplanes. The 9/11 attacks happen. We go to Afghanistan. We lose 158 soldiers, and we're side by side with you when these things happen to America, and then to stab us in the back by changing all these goalposts, it's ridiculous. And if there was a solid argument that said, look, Mexico represents this amount, Canada represents this amount, Mexico's getting 25%, Canada's getting 2%. At least it's proportionate, and at least you're consistent with what you're saying. But I think his own administration is picking and choosing what they're saying depending on the day and the way the wind blows. So, like, what's it going to be? And this is where I think they're wrapping up that goal of wanting to get as much revenue as possible because they're in such the 37 or 38 trillion dollar debt that the country has. They're trying to extract as much money in whatever way they can, that they're trying to wrap this big pile of, excuse my language, but this big pile of shit that they have to deal with,
Mhm.
by utilizing, well, we can't say we need money, so what do we say? Oh, let's call it the fentanyl. Oh, it's the border crossing. It's unsecured. So, anyways, that's fundamentally why I have removed the whole Maple MAGA thing until, as long as this tariff threat looms, I don't want to be associated with it.
That's fair. I am kind of curious in terms of, you're a business guy. You've made a lot of money. You're very successful. Started in multiple businesses. You have one that's on the go with the axe throwing. It has multiple locations in both the U.S. and Canada. And so I know you've had your fair share of negotiations, I'm sure. And I'm curious as if you think there's just kind of a lot of, I mean, we know it's Trump. Lots of smoke screens, lots of mirrors, and yes, smoke and mirrors like he tends to throw out there. From my perspective, I agree. I don't think it was ever really about, about fentanyl to a degree, but I get the feeling he sees that the IRGCs were operating up here. The Chinese police stations are operating up here. We actually welcome terrorism on a crazy level here in Canada. And I think this is his way of like, you guys need to figure that out and really get that stuff stomped out because that can't be coming across the longest unmanned border in the world. And so I am kind of curious if you think that's where it's going, or do you think really it's about, we're going to try to extract as much value, or it could be both, out of Canada at this point in time?
Oh, honestly, I think like given Trump's personality, like he's I would say this may sound contradictory, but he's pretty direct.
Mm.
And so I think if that were the issue, he would have said it, and he would have said like, look, you just let 5,000 people in from Gaza. Like even if you take a small percentage of 2% of the people that you let in, let's assume 2% have been radicalized. What's the math? Is that 100 people? So do we have 100 radicals in our country? Like we don't know.
Right.
Like, and there is no proper way to do full vetting. Egypt, which is right beside it, won't even accept them.
Right.
The Middle Eastern countries won't accept them, but Canada accepts them, gives them shelter, food. And don't get me wrong, like there's a lot of victims there. And I'm not denying that at all. And there's a lot of children, when it comes to like young children, especially particularly like women, like 100%. But once you start getting into like, we don't know. And so what type of vetting has actually taken place here? And when you let in 5,000 people, there is this inherent risk, and arguably, I mean, they would have a good argument with that because I can't remember, was it a 23-year-old that was caught going into New York, and he's a Canadian. I thought he was a Canadian citizen,
Yeah.
but he definitely came from Canada, and he was going to commit a terrorist act in New York, and he got caught, and thankfully he did. But I mean, we do have this open border system, unfortunately, where you can basically, have this criminal record. In
Hmm.
third world countries, everything can be bought, and it can be bought for cheap. You can get a new name, new passport, and new ID. You come into the country on a student visa. You're a student, and you didn't show up for your first day, like the 50,000 people, students that didn't show up for their first day of school because they fraudulently said that they're coming here on a student visa.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that's been a loophole in Canada for a very long time. And that's something we haven't wanted to admit as Canadians, is that we've welcomed and become a hotbed for a lot of extremist groups here in the country, and it's only gotten worse with the current leadership. But I can definitely see your point there of like, if it really was about that, Trump would be far more direct. It seems like could be a lot more than that, based on his rhetoric. And so I kind of will shift and pivot to the conversation. Is you said you made this flip when it comes, you have a TikTok account well over 200,000 followers. And did you, like, if you were to give a percentage, like, do you feel like a lot of people turned on you, or do you feel like, nah, people kind of agree with where your statement is on this?
No, I really don't think people have.
Hmm.
And I think people have, I think it's probably the newer followers that don't really know me and don't really know me well,
Right.
that realize that, I'm a very logical person. And as soon as I'm saying like, look, I'm going to choose Canada over Trump any day, how do you argue against that?
Yeah.
Like who's going to choose something else more and above than their own country? And mind you, yes, we're being taxed to death. We have all these issues, but to basically have the U.S. and Trump declare what I think is economic warfare against us, by creating these impossible this shifting goalposts, and these impossible goals, when it's all under the guise of we want to actually extract as much money as we can from you. I mean, that's the part that I have problems with. And so I don't necessarily think there really has been a major shift of people being like, oh, you traitor, how dare you turn against Trump. There's probably people in the US that follow me that think that. But those people need to keep in mind, I'm a Canadian. I'm
Mhm.
not an American. Even though I supported Trump and I'm a huge fan of Trump and I have followers in the US as well, the majority of my followers are in Canada. And if the ones that are upset, they probably are American. And rightfully so. And here's the thing too, is like the counter argument is Donald Trump got elected to and he has the mandate. He never once declared that we're going to make Canada 51st state. We need the resources. It was never part of his campaign. We're going to tariff the shit out of Canada. He never said any of that stuff. So it's taking a lot of Americans for surprise as well that he would do that to his own neighbors, especially when we've had the NAFTA agreement and a free trade agreement among these countries. At that point, what's the point of having any sort of agreement if it's completely and utterly useless? And one day, one person decides to just flip a switch and say, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to sign this executive order today. Tariffs just went up 25%, and they can do it just like that with no repercussions. There's no point of having a contract. Why negotiate anything in the first place?
Right.
We may as well just operate on good faith and just say, let's just not have tariffs. And then you can change your mind. I can change my mind, and we can all change our minds at any given point in time.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense for the U.S. to be able to, do that solely on their own. Like it makes no point of even just having an after agreement in the first place. And what it does is it actually ruins the ability to trust the systems that were put in place in these legal frameworks that exist. There's no faith in the system anymore.
Yeah. And I'll even go as far to say, NAFTA, Trump scrapped NAFTA in his first term, and then
Mhm.
renegotiated USMCA. And
Yep.
that is probably the part that I find the most odd is seeing him in these interviews saying, who negotiated this? And I was like, you did, and that's where I'm trying to understand where the thought process is on that, because admittedly, that was the one where I was like, pretty confused when he made that comment. And it's like, you negotiated this. You put this in, and you said it was the best deal of that time at the time, and now we're switching that up. So I don't know if it comes with the fact that it's a second term and he doesn't really care anymore, and he can just go forward, doesn't have to worry about getting reelected, or what it is. Then I'll kind of shift it over to you here. Is this the issue that we're dealing with in Canada? As you said, Canada first. When it comes down to it, if someone's going to come at us, then we're going to choose our own first. But now let's look internally. Who do you want negotiating these tariffs and having these talks with Trump right now? If anyone, you could choose anyone in Canada right now, who would you want it to be doing it?
It would have to be someone with uh, a very strong negotiator. Honestly, the immediate person that comes to mind is Pierre Poilievre,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he's got the. You can't have someone like Jagmeet. You can't have anyone at the Liberal Party. The thing is, as soon as the Liberal in that name is included in the discussions, there's no respect
Yeah.
on the U.S. side. They do not respect them. They do not like them. They were rude to Trump during that 4 years when he was not reelected,
Mm-hmm.
when he was going through what he was going through. They were just brutal. They're poking fun and they're poking the bear, thinking it's never going to come back. And it came back, and it came back with a vengeance. And to a degree, I think there is a bit of that this is in a way a bit personal. If I say, it's probably 95% everything that I talked about, and probably 5 to 10%, there's a bit of personal. I think that in a way, there's probably some gratification for him to do this, because this is the ultimate payback. You guys all basically messed with me. Now I'm back, and this is his revenge.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, he is ultimately getting it. And so the Liberals cannot be involved in this in any way, shape, or form. I don't think anyone in the NDP is competent to handle this type of negotiation. It would have to be someone on the conservative side, and that's why it's so important. Like it makes absolutely no sense for anyone to be negotiating any sort of deal with the US without an election. Because how could an outgoing administration, how could a prime minister who has resigned negotiate anything on our behalf? How can he be making any of these sort of decisions when he's already out the door? He told us he's out the door. And then you have an unelected, we're going to have an unelected prime minister. It's going to be a prime minister that got voted upon by members of the Liberal Party, which anyone can sign up from halfway around the world as long as they have a first name, last name, and an email address. Like a dog could sign up for it. And so these are the type of folks that are going to be electing the next prime minister, and they're going to electing or selecting, I should say, the next prime minister. They get rid of Chandra out of nowhere. They
Yeah.
give us no good reason. And I honestly think, in a way, he's the only person that probably could have reasonably leaned more on the conservative side, and he was saying things that were much more reasonable, that fall in line more with conservative values than liberal values, but they gave no good reason of
Yeah.
why they kicked him out. And so I really do believe that Chandra was a legitimate threat to the throne, and they're instilling Mark Carney. And this has been going on for quite some time. And I remember getting a phone call from a family member who said, "Hey, I was just at this dinner." He's like, "It's kind of fucked up." He's like, "Have you ever heard a guy named Mark Carney?" I said, "No." And he's like, "Well, this guy used to be the governor of, the Bank of Canada, Bank of England, et cetera, et cetera." And he's like, he made this presentation. He's like, "This guy's going to try to be the prime minister." This was last year.
Mm.
And so that was, yeah, it was like early last year. I think it was like maybe before the summer. But when he gave that speech, like these are to senior executives in the Toronto area, and everyone was like, "Hey, this guy's going for the top spot." That had already been started before he was brought in by Trudeau as an economic advisor. That this was always the plan.
Right. This was, things get bad enough, we can kind of take him out and replace him with Carney. And that has been part of the conversation. Also, the concern that people have been having is the fact that through all this, somehow, some way, out of all the liberal members of the liberal leadership race, Carney's the only one who's been able to be in the conversations, talking to people involved with the tariff negotiations. If that doesn't concern anybody, I'd be shocked of why that doesn't concern you.
We have an unelected private citizen that is involved. That's what he is. He's an unelected private citizen. Who is he to be involved in any sort of conversations at all, ever? He's not even a member of parliament.
Yeah, what's a security clearance too on top of that? Like, it's insane.
It is insane.
Yeah, and that's like it just shows that I'm very curious of how this leadership race is going to pan out. Like, clearly they want Carney to be in. They've all kind of signed off on him, but will they rig the vote? I am curious, because it is pretty nonchalant the way they've kind of gone about it at this point. They made sure to clamp down a little bit. Now they have to make sure the address is within Canada. Other than that, it's all good. So it is concerning. But like, so moving on to kind of more so kind of wrapping up kind of our last few questions here is, now the focus being on Canada. We want Poilievre to be having those negotiations. And now we're actually having the first conversation in a handful of years about building pipelines here in Canada. We had Minister of Natural Resources and Energy, Jonathan Wilkinson, saying, "Yeah, we're going to start building up these LNG plants. It's great." And Vashi on CTV is like, "You just told me last year saying you're discontinuing all of it and not trying to electrify like the phase 2 of it at all." He's like, "Oh, I didn't say that." I was like, "We have the article. You said it right here. Are you kidding me?" And so now all of a sudden the Liberals are doing this whole push of like, "No, we want to get the LNG going. We'll start slowly talking about pipelines." And Quebec is saying no pipelines coming through the province, which is psychotic. So we'll start with a part one of that question is, what are your thoughts on Liberals trying to do a 180 on oil and gas, and should anyone actually believe them or take them seriously?
So first thing, if I were a leader of any party in Quebec said no, they get no transfer payments. There's no saying no.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whether you want it or not, like, you say no, you get no transfer payments, period.
Yeah.
Like, and they benefit. They want the benefit, but they don't want to take on some of the costs. Like, are you kidding me? Like, there's so much land, there's so much available land in all of Canada, and it's all, like, I think 90% of all Canadians live, I can't remember, within 30 minutes of the US border. It's some ridiculous number,
Yeah,
like
within
that.
100 kilometers. Yeah.
Yeah, 100 kilometers. Thank you. And so, first and foremost, Quebec has no right to say no to anything. And then two, the Liberals are the Liberals are really backstepping, because what had happened in the past is, I think it was Pierre Poilievre that was interviewing Mark Carney at the time, and I'm sure you've seen that, where he basically ripped him a new one, where it's like, so you can invest in these pipelines, and it's okay for you and your company to make billions off of it, but it's not okay for Canada to do it. Like, how does that make sense when it benefits you and you can do, and every other country can do it, but Canada's not allowed to? And it's such a ridiculous concept. And I think the Liberals can't be trusted because if they were going to do it, they would have done it by now. Instead, they canceled nearly what $176 billion worth of projects.
Yeah.
What we need right now is at least a quarter of a trillion, if not half a trillion dollars of projects to get the pipelines over to Asia, get them over to Japan, just like they asked us to, and get it over to Europe. Right now, Europe's getting, I think, all their natural gas from Russia.
Yeah.
And what happened to all the sanctions? Like we're supposed to be sanctioning Russia, and then you're fueling them. You're fueling their war.
Yep.
I thought they're supposed to be fighting against it, and they're using that energy. But here's the other problem is because we have no other customer other than Canada and the U.S. We're in a way we screwed ourselves, and Trudeau screwed us. And if we had these pipelines on the go, if we implemented a structure where it is, through a publicly traded company, but Canada does have ownership through it, no different than Saudi Arabia does, our taxes could be reduced by minimum 20 to 25%. We have the third largest oil and gas reserves in the world, and we're not utilizing them at all. Like it makes absolutely no sense. And I honestly, my personally belief is within 30 to 40 years, I would say max we have a 30 to 40-year window max until we get to a point where there's going to be energy that is going to be available almost freely at zero cost to us. And I think it's fission technology. I don't know, or fusion. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but you're like, that's not that far away. And I know those investments are happening, and I know we're getting super close to that. So that means we have this small window to get as much money as possible from the resources that we have to put ourselves in a position where we're not drowning in debt, where we're able to lower taxes, where we have the infrastructure for that all Canadians need. But right now, like to me, Donald Trump is creating a race for resources. He's talking to Greenland. Oh, we want to take Greenland over because that they're being treated unfairly and it's a national security issue. And then he slips in, and they have all this great resources. That's what it's all about. It's got nothing to do with like national security and ships from China and Russia going to Greenland. What's in Greenland? Greenland is full of resources, and Canada, and he even said it with Ukraine. Ukraine, you got to pay us back. You're going to pay us back with your resources. You have a lot of like great minerals, and you have a lot of great stuff. And then, if Canada, doesn't want these tariffs, they got to join the 51st state. It is an absorption of resources that are needed in order to build the future, because there's going to be certain minerals that are going to be required to power things like AI, can be to power self-driving vehicles, to power just even the electric vehicles. And right now, I think close to 80 or 90% of them, all in China. I think China produces, 80 or 90% of the global EV batteries. And so this to me is like a major resource race is what's happening right now.
Yeah, and I think it's exactly what you said. That's exactly what we're seeing currently, and that is something Canada has to start being smarter to at this point. And we have to have people in power who are willing to be smart to that and not put off stupid stuff, as Mark Carney has in his book entitled "Value," saying no, we just got to rejig the market so that it penalizes all the people who do anything with oil and gas and only focuses on green technology, which clearly has done so well for us at this point in time. So that leads to the question with the Quebec situation. The concern people have is if there is a pipeline that goes through Quebec, Quebec has voiced multiple times that they are so interested in leaving Canada. So concern people have is like, okay, if it goes through Quebec, we kind of get screwed if they end up trying to leave. So why not just stop at Ontario, then have it put on tankers to go through the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and then off to Europe from there? Do you think that is a smart idea at all? Or it's like, no, we can just find ways to kind of hamstring and make Quebec bend to the will of Canada and just put the pipeline through there?
I think it'd be too expensive to take that approach, like the transportation time from Ontario to the East Coast. I think I had a coworker of mine actually do that drive. I thought it was a couple of days. I mean, maybe more. Like I think it is a much and I could be wrong. Maybe it's a day. I mean, I'm just making it up. But I think the cost is significantly more than the amount that could flow through the pipeline just freely. And truthfully, I think if any citizen of Quebec realized the true nature of the transfer payments and how much they actually get subsidized by the other provinces like BC and Alberta subsidizing all of Canada is fundamentally what it comes down to. And I can't remember, like, let's say 75% of all transfer payments, they go to Quebec. So if you leave, you have a bankrupt country of Quebec. What, like, I legitimately do not know how they are how they would be able to exist without significantly raising taxes. And that would be the most taxed, probably the highest taxed country in the world in order to sustain the uh, expenditures that the province has. So I really don't see it being feasible that they leave. And the last time the vote was narrow. It was a narrow vote. I think it was something like point something of a percent, or it was definitely less than half of a percent, is what I remember.
Hmm.
When they tried to vote whether they should leave or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll finish off with this last question here for you: is with all the craziness that's going on, what makes you hopeful for Canada as we move on here?
Honestly, election. I think election, finally having a government that has common sense and intelligence. And what people don't, I think, give enough credit to Pierre Poilievre is he's an intelligent person. Someone who is not intelligent wouldn't be able to communicate in the fashion that he does. It wouldn't be able to have the eloquence in the way he chooses his words. And he's very, I think, politically, respectfully correct. And he's also firm in his positions. And it's very difficult to argue against someone like that in that type of a leadership position, because he's been around for a long time, and for him to see the things he has seen with different party leaders of the Conservative Party, he knows what works, what doesn't. I've seen this huge, I would say, not a transition, but a huge growth in the learning of what he has in the understanding of economics and the economy and how things work. Because I find in the last year and a half to 2 years, he's been saying, maybe in the last year to year and a half, he's been saying a lot more economically sound policies of things that economists would generally be very well aware of. Where previously he wouldn't necessarily have commented in the way he comments today. And so I think that shows a tremendous amount of intelligence, because he's able to not get consultants, but he's able to actually internalize a lot of this information and actually gracefully say it to the public of what needs to happen in Canada. Um, there's several things that there's so many things that they need to tackle. There's definitely law reform, and I think he recently, was it yesterday, he talked about I think anything more than 40 milligrams of fentanyl, he wants life sentences
Yeah.
on. So if you're carrying that much fentanyl on you, you're going to be getting an automatic life sentence. And that is a very good and strong approach, because if you are trafficking and selling, these narcotics that are fundamentally killing, like, 50,000 Canadians, and I can't remember over what time span, or if it's on a yearly basis, but we have a massive crisis. And so the way you stop it is to actually have legal reform in that regard, where you make the punishment so severe that you never want to mess around. And it's no different than what Trump is looking at doing, at sending criminals to El Salvador.
Yeah.
Like, we send people to people, like, I'm from El Salvador, and I follow that mega prison. Like, that's a double punishment.
Hmm.
Like, not only are you going to serve jail time, you're going to do it over there. Like, good, like, that is going to deter people, and it's going to make them think twice to ever commit crimes. And we don't have that here. Here, you get a slap on the wrist. And so when it comes to, safety, to me, is the number one thing, because if you're not safe, you're not alive. And people are basically, running around like a lawless, we have a lawless society, and they're able to do whatever they want. We run into these issues where nothing else matters. Who cares about taxes at that point? Who cares about, like, what government spending? Nothing matters if you're not alive.
Right.
You need to be alive in order for any of that stuff to matter. So that's the first thing that I think he needs to tackle. And then I think he's just going to build an incredible amount of pipelines, which we desperately need. And we also need to start. We need to cut back on foreign spending. We it's weird to me. Like, it's almost like if my, I don't know, cousin, brother, or a family member was bankrupt, I wouldn't be expecting a brand new TV from him for Christmas. So why are we doing the same thing and buying TVs for everyone around the world?
Right. Spot on. I really appreciate it, Mario. I know you got to go, but thank you so much for taking the time out. It was great to get your insight, and I hope you have yourself a great day.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, good talking to you.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Good stuff. You
Bye.
too. Bye.